So guys, I want to talk about AEW, and Simon Miller did a video talking about whether or not AEW went too far, and it's regarding what happened this week, that Darby Allin threatened one of the Death Rider members with a taser. He sprayed mace on somebody, and then he also threatened to throw a cocktail Molotov at somebody else, really. So I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to really hype that there is going to be fire used in the I Quit match. And then the other thing, too, is that there has been some conversations about possibly an Inferno match happening in AEW. Like, I think what they want to do is Mark Briscoe versus MJF in an Inferno match. But more than likely, they're saying that for Darby Allin and John Moxley. And they're probably going to do that at Full Gear. And I also think the other reason why you want to do that is because MJF is in movies now, so it's not a good look if, he burns himself and becomes like a burn victim, Save that for somebody like Moxley and Darby, who would probably do horror films if that's the path to go down, really. But the thing about it is that there are a lot of people talking about whether or not they went too far. And I think, like, in a way, yes, they did. And the reason why I say this is because that when there's something called expectation. So when you do something like they had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre match between Jeff Hardy and Jeff Jarrett. So let's say they were having a feud for a couple of months, really. So if you have that match and you have Leatherface come out with a chainsaw, and then you have Jeff Hardy threaten to cut Jeff Jarrett with a chainsaw, that's too far in the sense that how do you use a chainsaw in a professional wrestling match? Because the payoff would be them using a chainsaw at each other. The same way with Darby Allin, he may throw a Molotov cocktail at John Moxley, and that might be the payoff, but I understand a couple of things as well, really, where it's almost like you can do something like that because there's a lot of stunts and things that have been done in Hollywood. So there's a way to do that safely, but there's also that thing, too, of what if they can't take it that far? Because, when you do professional wrestling, especially when you incorporate fire, there's a lot of things that you have to deal with. Like, there's the fire marshal. For example, when Darby Allin was at Double or Nothing last year, I believe, like, online, there was talk saying that he was not allowed to go past a certain part of the stage, or else they would shut down the show, or else they would do something like, give them, like, a heavy fine or whatever, really, or say you can't come back, really, because of how, like, you have to be really careful when you use things like fire. But especially throwing a Molotov cocktail, you have to think about, what if you want to do a spot right by the ringside area just to kind of, like, entertain the crowd? What would happen if, you have kids that are freaked out by the heat, or parents and who are freaked out by the heat and their kids like, I don't want my kid close to something like that. Or what would happen if, you have, one of them run around fire in front of the audience, because that can, like, scare a bunch of little kids. And that's kind of the argument as well, really, about the safety factor, about how far they can take things. So you're going to incorporate all this stuff, really. So it's almost like, how far can you incorporate this stuff when you actually do the match, and how is the audience going to react? And then the other part of it is the safety aspect, because, when you're working with fire, or you want to do it in the ringside area and other things like that, that can upset people because they may be too close to the flames, or that can upset people because they have kids and they may be like, I don't want my kid seeing somebody run around fire, or I don't want my kid being close to that level of fire, really. And then there's the other thing, too, is that they have bad track record, because you remember when Darby Allin went through the glass table in Greensboro, glass flushed into the audience, so it could have easily, and that was inexcusable, and that was, like, horrible, because that shows disrespect, and fuck Darby Allin, fuck AEW for that, because they could have cut somebody. And then Sting's last match, somebody got blinded, really. Or even, like, when they did Swerve and Hangman in the Lights Out match, they made sure to make sure they were in a cage, really, so nothing would fly, really. Or even when they did the hypodermic needle, I think they had Hangman wear gloves and whatever, because if you want to do something like that, you have to make sure it's done safely, really. So these are the issues. But I do think that the big part of it is that I'm for AEW doing stuff like this, because first of all, you're not WWE, and you have to say that AEW has always been TV-14. It's always been pushing the envelope, and it's always been that company like, okay, well, we're inspired by Japanese wrestling, and part of Japanese wrestling is the hardcore death matches, and also the longer matches and other things like that. That's why you have Will Ospreay go do long matches. That's why you have Takeshita and other people, Takeshita, Kenny Omega, Kyle Fletcher, Hangman, MJF, and a few other ones who do the longer matches. That's why you have death matches like Chris Jericho versus Nick Gage, Darby Allin and Sting versus the Young Bucks, Swerve and Hangman. So, because you're also trying to show your audience two things. That one thing that happened with WWE is that now they've been in the PG era for over 20 years, I believe. Close to 20 years they've been in the PG era. And they may never go back to TV 14 because that's what their audience is comfortable with. It would take a huge cultural shift. And then ultimately, it's like what I said, that how far ahead is AEW with their shock value and violent shit? That if WWE tries to do that, it's almost like, it almost feels like a copycat. And then the other thing, too, is that there's always professional wrestling for everybody. So WWE can always be that PG, and you can always have that R-rated stuff. It's the same thing within Hollywood right now. You have Lilo and Stitch made over $1 billion. That's your family-friendly kid film. And then you have Demon Slayer, which is probably going to make around $700 million in maybe a month or something like that. So it's almost like saying you have stuff for the kids and you have stuff for the adults, really. And AEW, in my opinion, should be an edgy TV 14. And people also need to understand this. There are people who bring their kids to Combat Zone Wrestling, Game Changer Wrestling, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, and other shit like that. There are people who bring their kids to R-rated films. There's actually a disturbing study that I remember over 10 years ago. I saw an article that from the age of 2 years old to the age of 40, Family Guy was a number one show among 2-year-olds all the way to the people who are the age of 40, really. So it kind of tells you that, people make there's adult content and people watch it for everybody. I remember when I was a kid, a few years ago, they showed Pulp Fiction in downtown New Haven. And there was a guy taking maybe his 7-year-old kid to see Pulp Fiction, hearing about dead nigger storage. Oh, I just shot Marvin in the face and other things like that. Or I remember there was this woman who brought her baby in a baby stroller to see Whiplash and other things like that. There's always situations where people, say AEW is family entertainment, even if they do some R-rated stuff. And I actually think that that's actually good because children should be exposed to adult situations at a young age because it tells them that the world is not Barney and Friends. It's not Bluey. It's not, it's not happy shit, really. The world has violence and intensity, really. So sometimes, you need to expose your children a little more to that stuff because if you don't do that, they're gonna be they're gonna go through an age in their life where they become exposed and they're gonna be really depressed. You gotta say, hey, the world is not just lollipops and rainbows, type of thing. Really, it's not Barney and Friends. There's a lot of shit that happens in our world. So I think with AEW, yes, they went far in a lot of ways, but I support how far they go, really. I'm really excited to see this match. I actually think that, going to St. Louis, there are a couple of matches on the card that I really want to see, but my biggest match is definitely the I Quit match. That's the reason why I'm going. And then the second reason is Okada, Takeshita, and Bandito and Brody King, because that's gonna be great. And then there's Joe and there's also Joe and Hangman, a few other things like that. Sorry, one of the neighbors, one of the kids broke something. They got to clean it up outside. So they're having a bit of their hardcore match out here, type of thing, really. But that's kind of really the big point of all this is that I think with AEW, their identity is to cross some lines, really. And sometimes, I think in some ways, when they cross lines, they're reckless, or sometimes they may have a big vision that they can't do because they have to follow safety laws and whatever, really. And I also appreciate Tony Khan because I do feel that one of the big benefits of him owning his own company is that he doesn't have to listen to shareholders. He doesn't have a board. He has nobody to answer to. And one of the benefits of that is that he can do whatever the hell he wants, really. And that's good because professional wrestling shouldn't be, oh, well, it makes sense for Trick Williams and Ricky Starks to have an I Quit match and they're supposed to cover it in blood. And then they say, okay, well, while that works storyline wise, oh, well, we can't have that because we're going to Saudi Arabia and there's a lot of families that are going to be watching the WWE now, so we got to make it kiddie and whatever, really, type of thing, really. They got to share some chocolate milk with each other and whatever, really, because there's a lot of that shit that happens in WWE where they can't go far because they have to think about shareholders. They got to think about other things that make the money as well, really. So it's good to have, artists that don't have those restrictions, really. And Tony Khan is one of those artists. But we'll see what happens, really. Did they go far? Yes, but I don't think that. But I think that definitely excites me for more stuff, and it's a statement to say that AEW is strong PG-14, is strong TV-14, while WWE is probably like a mild PG.